Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Talking Acquisition. This is the weekly high-energy, informative, and slightly opinionated view on all things acquisition, procurement, and government contracting related. This is the place where the contracting and acquisition communities and our industry partners connect to talk, listen, and learn from each other. My name is William Randolph, and I am your host, and I'd like to introduce my co-host, my colleague, my partner, and dear friend, Soraya Carrera. Hello, Soraya. How you doing today?
Hey, well, doing pretty good. Got a slight summer cold, but we're hanging in there. How are
All right,
you?
we'll make it work. We'll make it work.
All right. Well, let me start off with our disclaimer. Our podcast shares information and views on a variety of topics that impact the federal acquisition community. Our goal is to provide thought leadership and perspective, not to criticize, judge, or render political opinions, although some of those might come out. We provide this free service because we are former federal acquisition professionals and leaders. We believe that the creativity, innovation, and effectiveness of our community is unleashed when we share knowledge, information, and learning. We hope you enjoy our podcast, and we welcome the views and comments of our colleagues across the private and public sectors. Well, I think today is a really good time to start talking about all this noise level that's out there about returning to the office.
Yes.
I've been attending a few conferences and I've spoken at a couple of leadership events, and I know you have too. And this topic comes up quite a bit, especially from a leadership perspective. How do we do this? How do we bring our folks back into the office? What's the right approach? How much telework? People are like batting that around. And I know many agencies have made decisions, but I think some employees are still very apprehensive about coming back. So I think today it would be a good topic because it does affect our community, especially the acquisition community. And I can speak, from my perspective, having gone through the pandemic or most of the pandemic with the DHS contracting community, and we were quite effective at working from home. That doesn't mean it was perfect, but it was quite effective. We got the job done, we delivered, we executed according to plan. We were able to achieve or even exceed our goals. We did get another A in the Small Business Administration scorecard. That's always important. And we met all of our competition numbers, and each of the components did a phenomenal job, including headquarters. But it doesn't mean it wasn't without some cost, right? We onboarded several employees, virtually. Some people had not even met one another. In fact, when I went to retire, I had employees that I had not actually met until I retired, right? So that was pretty wild. But it had its challenges. And although the staff worked well and effectively, I understand why there are some who are making that call to return to the office. I always think of the public-facing services, right? Those organizations that work with the public, be they like Social Security Administration, USDA, and others, who truly have to work with the public directly. USCIS, within DHS, TSA, who never got to work from home, not the agents, not the Secret Service, not the Federal Protective Service. They were there constantly. They were out there, and then some of them now, even more force, have to be back because we have to deal with the public. It's a tough call. It's a very tough call because you had employees operating from home. They were being effective for the most part, as far as we know. And now you're telling them they got to come back to the office. And for a lot of employees, it's hard. The other reason it's hard is because not everything is really back to normal, right? You still have news articles about cases being on the rise, people even boosted and shot. In fact, I have a few friends who have been boosted and all the whole bit, and they still get COVID, albeit much milder cases of COVID. And then there's the whole public transportation bit. And now, of course, we're dealing with inflation, gas prices, right? So there's less money in your pocket and it's costing more to travel and to get to work. So from a leadership perspective, just a few thoughts that I always have. First of all, we have to be honest with our employees. We have to talk to them. We have to help them understand the why. In my entire career, that was one of my biggest mantras to my entire leadership team. And it was one of the things that I swore to myself when I became a supervisor and then a manager and then a leader: always give the why. People may not like your reason. They may not agree with your reason, but they will respect that you respect it enough you respected them enough to explain the why.
Yeah.
They need to understand. They may not like it, man. I can remember so many times people gave me the why, and I was like,
It's like, we didn't like it. Yeah.
but you told me, you
Yeah.
respected enough, you respected me enough to talk to me. And I think that's the most important thing that I can ever say to leaders is respect your people enough to give them the why and to hear them out.
Yeah,
Let
agreed.
them have their day in court and tell you what they think. Doesn't mean you're going to go along with them. It doesn't mean you're going to agree, but sometimes you got to give ear to these grievances, right? And you
Yep.
have to help them understand the whys. And then you also have to be flexible. We are living in a very different time. Commutes are hard, gas prices are high. I always try to be flexible with my team. Even before pandemics, I was always flexible about people, having to pick up their kids from school or having medical situations or caring for loved ones. I tried to be as flexible as I could within the boundaries of the
Sure.
rules. And I didn't always look at it from I have to treat everybody exactly the same. You don't have to treat everybody exactly the same, but you do have to treat people fairly and equitably. Those are the words that I always, aspire. You got to be empathetic, compassionate, and treat people fairly, equitably, and consistently.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. So I have been on this kick for like the last few months as things started loosening up. I've been screaming from the rafters for anyone that will listen that I believe this going back to offices evolution will be the next greatest leadership challenge that government faces since our response to 9/11. Okay, it's been 20 years since something has impacted government the way this has. So the shutdown, and the thing about it is we didn't have much latitude in the shutdown. It was just shut it down. Okay. And then organizations figured it out. They muddled through and they figured it out. And the most important piece of that is employees figured it out. They have been for almost 2 years, if not a whole 2 years. March of 2022 is a whole 2 years. So we're talking 22, 20, 24, 26 months. Employees have been self-governing and pretty much self-managing, and productivity in many cases has increased. So now I understand the desire for the pendulum to swing back. And in some degree, I'm very much interested in seeing it as well, because I believe, at least for our community, we have a high touch, high engagement, high relationship line of business. Okay, we are in the people business. From a standpoint, yep, we move paper around and terms and conditions and numbers, but we are in the people business. So we learn to do this business by being in close proximity. We learn this business, in my opinion, by modeling and simulating what we see. And in this distributed fashion, that becomes exponentially harder. So from a person that's on the workforce side of it, kind of workforce development and the people side of it, I understand. But this is going to be a leadership challenge because this is chock full of trust, in my opinion. It's all about, have we done the things to allow the pendulum to come back? Okay. And I'm not sure. I think people are just opening things up. It's like you get in the email and said, hey, come back 3 weeks from now. We've shut the cafeteria down. We're going to hand out some Lysol wipes and everything's going to be fine. Okay. I just don't think that's going to do it. I just don't think that's going to do it. So I think it's a trust component. And the challenge with many is that the trust wasn't there before the pandemic.
Boom.
Okay, so now you're going to ask people to trust now? Okay,
now
after 2 years of all this chaos, now just please come trust. So that's my concern, is that the leadership pieces, I got the transactional stuff and please, the sunk cost and all that, I get it, buildings and leases, yeah. But have we done, has government done the leadership work to prepare the environment for the pendulum swing to come back?
Well, I think this is where you're going to see the difference between the really good leaders versus the maybe not so good leaders, right?
Yeah.
I think that's where you're really going to see it. That doesn't mean that the good leaders aren't going to have a tough time of it. I'm not trying to
Correct.
imply that at all, but I think there's a difference in how they handle themselves. Some will slap their fist on the table and say, well, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And then there are going to be others who are going to say, let's work through this. Let's figure this out, because we ultimately have to get to X, whatever X may be, whether it's 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a paper, whatever X is that brings you back, we're going to have to get there. And the good leaders are going to say, let's work through this.
Let's work through
Let's sit down and figure this out, right? And they are going to have, hopefully, or have had the kind of relationship where they can work it out, right? The other thing that I would also say is, I don't think the pendulum has to swing 100% back to where we were.
Yes.
Right? Now, because there were some organizations and leaders who were hell-bent on nobody could telework, right? I mean, I remember I had a couple of people, if I don't see them, they can't do it. I'm like, well, you don't see them now. Your butt's in here talking to me, you're not seeing them now.
Right.
Okay? Or worse, if you're not here, you don't see them.
Yeah.
Or the leader who said, my folks can't telework, but then they were taking their little extra day here and extra day
Here and there. Yeah.
I don't think so. No bueno. So what I really think has to happen is people have to be rational about this, right? You can't say to people, we're going to go from 0 to 60. The shutdown was hard enough, right?
Oh, absolutely.
When we shut down, we didn't even have the technologies ready in a lot of cases, right? We weren't really ready to do this, but we figured it out. And the same thing has to happen going back. We have to figure it out, and we got to work with people. And what I've advised a lot of leaders that have asked me is give them a reason to be there. Help them understand the reason to be there.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Our business is a very people-oriented business. And I believe that when you talk about our line of work, those drive-by meetings are extremely important. And they are hard to do on Zoom and Teams. You can try. God knows I tried it, and I know that you tried it. I mean, a lot of us, we were doing it, right? We were pretending we were doing that. Oh, I think I'm like walking by your desk, right? Yeah, but it wasn't real, right? And we did a lot of things. We were social on Zoom and Teams, but it is hard. That face-to-face, nothing substitutes for that touch point, that looking someone in the eye and having a conversation. And in the business that we're in, sometimes it's about the communication, right? The nonverbal communication.
Sure. Absolutely.
That I can look someone in the eye, and sometimes you can't see it on Zoom, whether they're really getting you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so I agree with you. This is a very important business where you do have to have touch points. It is about customer experience and service. It is about pulling together and coming together as teams sometimes and sitting at a table and having a conversation.
Yeah.
And being able to read each other's emotions and actions and read each other's eyes. And you cannot always do that on Zoom and Teams. And it's also easy to escape. You see, I can do this and I'm gone.
Yeah.
That's how you bail out of a conversation. You bail out of the emotion.
You bail out. Yeah.
People do that.
Right.
People do that. So I think it is incumbent upon leadership to give the why, to help people understand the why, and to be deliberate in what they do.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to bring people back, be deliberate.
Yeah.
Be deliberate about, it's going to be 1 day a week or 2 days a week. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's what happens on those days.
Yes.
Because if you tell people to come back so they can sit on a Zoom call, that ain't going to fly.
It's done. It's over.
That ain't going to fly. I did this, by the way. So there were a couple of times that I went to the office because I had to go to like one meeting, and then I said, well, I'll stay the whole day. Then I was on Zoom all day, and I'm like, so I feel, I'm going to date myself. The Maytag repairman, remember those commercials? By himself? That was me.
I do.
I do. Yeah, you can't.
You lost them. You literally lost them.
Exactly. Yeah. So you got to be deliberate in what you're doing, and you have to have the reason for them to be there. If it's about, working as a team, then you better be working as a team. Don't invite them over to go sit on a Zoom call, because that ain't gonna fly.
Yeah, agreed.
So
Agreed.
those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I had when you talked about how the shutdown was so impactful and quick. One of my colleagues made this statement, and it was so profound for me. I just had to stop and process it for a minute. He said that about 10 years worth of evolution happened in 10 weeks, 2.5 months. Okay. That if you look at, if you'd have went to 2030, yeah, if you'd have went to 2030, if you went to 2030, the world would look like this. Okay. He said, but we had about 2.5 months, 10 weeks, and that's why it was so painful. So the expectation, to your point, that the pendulum is just it's gonna take 10.5 weeks and we'll be back to like normal. Forget it. The world has changed. And I truly believe that I keep going, I want to keep going back to this trust component. I remember, and I'm sure you probably had these same conversations. We'd get in the big conference room with the big table with the big chairs. You know, serious stuff was going to happen when you're in the big conference room.
Yeah, exactly.
And we'd have debates on whether 1 day or 2 days of pay period.
Yes.
You remember those conversations? We actually had those conversations. And I remember one of my bosses, prior to my time at DHS, he said, if you have to worry about your employee working at home, you've got to worry about them working at work.
Exactly.
Okay.
So funny enough, so I worked at USCIS and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but at USCIS for several years. And at USCIS, my staff was located throughout the United States. I mean, I had a huge contingent here at headquarters, but I had a huge contingent out in the field. And I wasn't there to see them every day.
Right.
I had to communicate with them at that time, VTEL. Remember the old VTEL, right?
Yeah,
that's how
I do.
But we did a lot of what we have done now, during the pandemic. That's what I was doing at USCIS.
Yes.
And I didn't feel I missed a beat. And I understood what they did, and I would go out and periodically go visit them. But periodically, it was like maybe twice a year. But I would go visit them.
Yeah.
And what I would do, I always walked around their offices to have their image in my head, so that when it was a conference call or it was a VTEL, I could still see them.
The environment. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess my commentary there is going to 100% telework wasn't hard for me from a staff standpoint. It was hard for me as a person because I love interacting with people. I like being around people. I'm an extrovert, right? So I like being around folks. So I had to adjust, but I knew I had to do it to make my staff comfortable, right? To make all of my leadership team comfortable. So I did it. Me, I would have gladly been in the office. I wasn't worried about it. I'd slap on the little mask and go inside. I'm gonna be in there talking to myself anyway. It was probably the best time to be in the office because there's nobody around. So, when you want to ride the elevator, it's fine. The elevator comes quick, right? There's nobody. You're not waiting to get to the restroom. Even the cleaning people were like not even there, right? So anyway, but there was no cafeteria either. But anyway, I would have lost weight. I should have done it. Anyway, but I do remember it was hard for me because I'm a people person, and I had staff members that had difficulty with it because they lived alone or they had a big family and lived in a small dwelling and it was loud and that kind of stuff. What I thought was amazing though was our adaptability. Everybody figured it out. Even my folks that worked in the classified environment, we figured it out. We figured out how to do shift work and all that good stuff. And I say that to say, just as we adapted then, we will adapt now. And people just have to think, and there has to be fairness on both sides, right? There has to be trust on both sides. You're right. If you can't trust your people to do their job from home, you probably can't trust them from the office. The workhorse is always going to be a workhorse.
Absolutely.
And the lazy one is always going to be a lazy one. I always remember talking to one of my colleagues, and I was asking about adapting to a new piece of software. And the response that she gave me, because we had implemented a new piece of software, and I said, I keep hearing that your folks are having trouble. And she said, Soraya, the people that are having trouble with this new piece of software are the people that had trouble with the old piece of software. And I said, that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Right?
Totally
the people who are lazy today are probably still going to be lazy tomorrow. The people who are unhappy are still going to be unhappy, and so on. But there has to be trust on both sides. Employees have to put themselves in their manager's shoes.
They do.
And they have to think from that perspective, because someday they're going to be in charge.
Yes. Yes,
and they're going to face the same situations.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
the piece of advice I always gave folks going into leadership, I lead the way I wanted to be led. And when I think of how I say something or what I say or how I come up with rules, I think about myself and say, how would I feel if someone was saying that to me?
That was the same
And I
thing.
got
Yeah,
to tell you, when you do that, when you do that empathetic approach, put on the other person's shoes,
sure.
you build relationships, you build trust.
You do. You do. Yeah, I agree. And I want to make sure that I am clear that I am not on one side of this on the
Yeah,
other.
I'm not either.
I'm on the side of good leadership.
Exactly.
That's the side that I'm on. It's like this isn't a employer versus employee
No.
conversation. This is about leadership. And the one thing that I have my first concern is about leadership evolution of our business and the kind of how we teach the osmosis of learning our business. But the second is I am very fearful of a two culture environment. Those that are in the office routinely, they're going to have a different communication channel,
Right.
speed, and quality than those that have to rely on virtual communication, a virtual communication channel. It's just going to be, in my opinion, I think it's just going to be different. And that's a grave concern that I have, that we will, if it's left totally to chance and totally to choice, that they're going to be two different cultures, because our organizations, our offices, all of our pictures
Right.
and flags and all the things
Yes.
that are on the wall, those are representations of our culture. And that environment is what turns our culture, makes our culture stick, if you will. We build a culture and it sticks by
Right.
all the stuff. And if you don't have the stuff, then people are going to have a culture, but they're just going to bring what they always had. You won't have an opportunity to reframe it into what you want the culture of the new thing to be. So that's my final concern about, just making sure I love your language, intentional. Let's be intentional about this.
Yeah, so along with culture, and you raise a really valid point about the culture of the organization, right? That you have to try to make sure that you thread that throughout the two environments that you might potentially, or two or three, because you'll have a hybrid
right?
as
Yeah.
well, right? So there's two or three environments. I agree 100% with culture. But here's the other thing: leaders have to be intentionally careful about not being biased, not leaning in to the people that they see every day and talk to every day, especially if they're all in the office together, and thinking, wow, look, he or she is more productive than this person, or more accessible, or more
committed, or loyal,
leaders,
all these words.
Exactly, all those words, right? Yeah. The leader, it is the job of the leader to bring out the best in their employees. It's the job of the employee to give their best, to show their best. But it's also the job of the leader to bring it out in people. And so the leaders are going to have to be intentional about making sure that they're not being biased and leaning towards those that are in the office versus those that aren't, right? Making sure that they're very intentional in how they handle it. And if the leader themselves is teleworking, they also have to be intentional that they're not, I guess, punishing those who go to the office, right? Yeah, because there's some of that too. So it is a catch-22. And like I said, you got to be patient. You got to be honest. You got to have the conversations. And most importantly, you got to listen to your people. You got to hear them out. And you're going to have to be very intentional in your behavior, how you evaluate, the metrics that you use. I mean, for me, this is like heaven because I'm a big metrics person, right? So I'm like, now you got to come up with your outcome-based metrics.
Right. Let's count widgets.
Measure, right? So you have to be very intentional with your metrics and how you're going to measure performance and accomplishments. And you're also going to have to be very intentional about how you say thank you. Mm-hmm. Think about that, right? The old, it used to be that you could swing by somebody's desk, or you could drop something off or
Pass
send
them in
an
the hallway.
Right, but you're going to have to be a little bit more intentional about how you say thank you, about finding those opportunities or creating those opportunities to acknowledge the great performance. And maybe you have to acknowledge it a little bit more, just like you have to be intentional about poor performance as well.
Absolutely.
That you have to be intentional about those conversations and getting to those people as quickly as possible and saying, hey, you're not cutting it. I'm seeing this. What's the problem? How are we going to fix this, right? Because those that are working real hard are going to notice that if you're ignoring it.
Absolutely.
And it's very easy to ignore
Absolutely.
when you're in this environment.
Yeah.
So I always say, be patient, listen, be honest, explain, and most of all, be thoughtful about what you're trying to do. Be realistic. Don't tell somebody to come to the office just because you want to see them sitting at their desk, especially if you're going to have a Zoom call.
Right.
Right. I'd be like, what? I drove I slogged down 14th Street just for the office and talk to Will on Zoom. Really?
Just for this. Well, Soraya, it's about that time. I say let's give our colleagues and our audience one nugget in this space. If you think, I'll go first if you don't mind. My nugget is that leadership should have a plan, not a decision. The decision of we're opening and this is what it looks like. I know that has to happen, but along with that, do the series of planning that says, how do we address the break room? How do we address lunch? How are the bathrooms going to be cleaned? How are we going to deal with hoteling? How are we going to deal with Cubeville? How are we going to deal with shared offices? Have a plan and then communicate that. It's not enough for the 3-line email that says, we're back open in 2 weeks. See you soon. Okay, that's not enough. Okay, I'll just say that's not enough. Have a plan. Do the work. Work with your staff, work with your people. Now is the time to get you a good survey monkey, a free survey monkey, and ask some questions, okay? But get the feedback so people can see their fingerprints on it when there's a plan to come back. So that's my nugget, not just decisions, but plans and decisions.
Well, I'm going to dovetail into yours because I agree with you. You got to have a plan. And you got to be deliberate on that plan, right? You have to be intentional and you have to periodically check your plan. And my comment is, and keep your options open.
Yeah.
Don't be one of these leaders that gets fixated on this way or the highway. Yeah. You have to keep your options open. You have to think and you have to look at your folks based on the work that they do. In other words, it's not enough to say, oh, we're open, everybody come back. Think about the work that they do. Right. I used to always describe it this way. My administrative staff that did my scheduling and that kind of stuff, that was a very different labor force than the folks that did the contracts, which was different from the people who did financial management, who was different from the people who did budget execution. So you have to look at people based on what they do and how they're affected. The people that worked in the classified environment needed to be in the office more because they can't take the work home. It's classified. But there were things that they could do from home, right?
Absolutely.
So you have to be very intentional when you look at that and think through, and you have to have this plan, and then you have to periodically visit your plan, and you have to keep your options open.
I love it. I love it.
And my final, my real heavy duty nugget is leaders lead. Lead. Stand up and be a leader.
Yep.
Don't hide behind the president said.
Yeah.
People do that. Oh,
of course.
No.
Of course.
When I make decisions,
they're mine.
Right? Here's what we're gonna do. Here's, we're gonna try this out, and then maybe we'll try something different later. And I did that a lot with my staff. That I would say, let's try this, and then we'll revisit it, and we'll talk about did it work or what didn't work, right? Yeah. And we'll adjust as we go. But here's how we're gonna go. So I agree with you. It's have a plan, not just a decision, but then make the decision to implement your plan and intentionally revisit it, talk about it, and adjust that plan as you go. Because I do think that different times of year may call for a different type of leadership.
Agreed.
Right? I think the
Yep.
circumstances we're in, call for
Absolutely.
the cases start to go up. You still have to deal with people.
Right.
People have
Right.
children, they have families, they
Sure.
have lives, and they get scared.
Yeah, they do.
Some of the fear is real.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's
Some
still,
of the fear-
boogeyman is still out there. Don't make no
yeah, that
mistake.
boogeyman is still out there and it wears a mask every now and
Make it
then.
right. Boogeyman is still out there. Yeah,
Yeah,
agreed.
the little COVID virus is still bouncing all over the damn place, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to be realistic and we have to be empathetic and compassionate. Leaders lead, stand up and lead. If ever we needed leaders to lead, it's
I told you, it's been 20 years since we've needed real leadership. Okay, it's been
It's
20
now.
years. It's time
It's
now. It's time now.
Yes.
All right. And
All
with
right.
that was a good one.
That was a great one. I love this topic.
Yeah, good stuff. It is great to see you again.
It is good to see you.
And the voice held up. Look, I couldn't tell a difference at all.
I only coughed once. This is really good.
All right, great seeing you, and we'll be back again next week.
Yep, definitely.
All right,
Definitely.
all the best.
Take
Be well.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.